breakout session. This is the Reverend Chris Calvin. She is the pastor of Emmanuel Lutheran Church, ELC in Ogden, Iowa. And she has traveled many times to Palestine, the West Bank. She has created a lot of partnerships with Palestinians, Christian and Muslim faiths. She's a passionate advocate working for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And I should say she just got back, so I'm just very anxious to hear not only a little history of how we got to where we are, but also from her personal witness. So welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I want to just mention that as I was setting up today, two songs were running through my head. The first one is a song, it's an Israeli song, written a Jewish song. Which means, behold, how good and blessed it is when brethren dwell together in unity. And the second song that was running through my head immediately afterwards was Ya Arab Salam, Ya Arab Salam, which basically means, so God have mercy on us. So here we are longing for the day when brethren can get together in unity and coming back to that prayer of God help us. I was initially asked in our planning to talk about, I guess you could say, an introduction to occupation, because the thought was that the ideas that Phyllis and Naeem would share with us would be from their experience, their broad experience, but there might be a need to just step back to the basics. Later that was rebranded as History of the Occupation from 1948 to the present. And as was mentioned, I did just get back from the Bethlehem government where I had some unique experiences. I'm also aware of some urgent advocacy things. So what I would like to do is a couple of things. I would like to begin by just very briefly reviewing how we got into this pickle in the first place. And then move into some things on the ground that I think you might find of interest. And I'm going to, as much as possible, use pictures and video that have been done by partners on the ground. I would like to ask before I begin, how many of you have heard me before? Hands up. And how many of you are familiar with the Jewish Voice for Peace video? Very short. An introduction to the occupation, because I have it's like 5 minutes long. Yeah, the animated one. The animated one. I see one hand, so I'm going to go ahead and show it then. And is it all right if I sit down? You'll still be able to hear me really well, but I didn't bring a remote, so that would be helpful. I am a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and we have the Focus campaign called Peace Not Walls. We have a table that is the one with the 3 kufiyas. Feel free to visit it and take things. I won't say any more about that. Occupation, control of one's territory by an outside force. What does it look like and how did we get there? Before we move forward, it would be good for you to jot down this website, because any questions that you have after today, you're going to find answered in the Learn and Teach section on this website. It is really, really thorough. So I just encourage you to have a look at it. And hands up when you have jotted that down so we can move to the next slide. PalestinePort.org. Okay, very good. All right. Now let's see if we have sound. And we will go to the animated video.
happen if you build a refuge for persecuted people in a place where another people already lived. In the next few minutes, you'll learn why this moral quandary is at the root of the struggle between Israelis and Palestinians, and what you can do to help achieve a just peace for everyone in the region. First, there are a couple of things it's helpful to understand. One, many Jews fled harsh persecution in anti-Semitic Europe, especially the Nazi Holocaust. Zionists encouraged massive immigration to historic Palestine, at that time a British colony, where Jews had an age-old connection and where small Jewish communities had long existed among larger groups of indigenous peoples. But when the UN offered the Jewish immigrants the majority of the land for a new state called Israel, for the indigenous Palestinians who lived there, it was a massive destruction of life. They rejected the UN's Partition Plan, and several Arab states invaded the new state of Israel. Israeli forces essentially erased over 400 Palestinian villages and towns. By the end of the fighting, Israel controlled 78% of historic Palestine. And when 750,000 Palestinians who fled or were expelled during fighting tried to return to their homes where the new state now stood, they were permanently barred by the Israeli government. While over 100,000 of their relatives and neighbors who hadn't left became second-class citizens of the new state, along with the new Jewish majority. Today, Palestinian refugees and their descendants number in the millions. Most are in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and Jordan. Many are spread throughout the world, with millions still living in refugee camps, seeking to return to their homeland. To sum up, one group of refugees found a much-needed home, but in the process, a new group of refugees was created. Here's the second thing to understand. Israel was founded as a Jewish state, but now ask yourself, what exactly does that mean? People had lots of ideas about what a Jewish state should look like. Some called for equality for all citizens. But what was created, in practice, was institutional discrimination against non-Jews. In other words, Israel ended up being built on a blueprint of exclusion. The Israeli government wants maximum land and resources for Jews, but not the Palestinians living there. That's why, inside Israel, Jews get special privileges, including rights to land and housing, that are denied to the Palestinian citizens, who make up 20% of Israel's population. That's also part of why Israel has never defined its borders. In fact, they still hold on to land, the West Bank and Gaza, that they conquered in the war in 1967. Since then, Israel has built Jewish settlements throughout the occupied West Bank, building Jewish-only cities and supplying them with infrastructure like roads and army camps, schools, and even a college. Military occupations were meant to be temporary, but after 40-plus years, this one looks permanent and entirely unjust. In the West Bank, Israeli Jewish settlers and Palestinians live on the same land, but must live under two completely separate and unequal systems of Israeli law. The Jewish settlers dominate the natural resources, including water and agricultural land, and they're backed by the Israeli army. To maintain the occupation, Israel has demolished thousands of Palestinian homes and orchards, confiscated Palestinian land, bombed a captive civilian population in Gaza, and punished resistance with raids, arrests, and assassinations, all to gain maximum land, while making life so difficult for Palestinians that they will either leave or be too afraid to resist. Palestinians have fought back. For decades, they tried to achieve national liberation through armed struggle. Some groups still do, but the majority now support popular protest instead. The deeply harmful pattern of control, repression, and violence profoundly harms Palestinians living under occupation and Israelis living as occupiers. This must be broken to reach a peaceful and secure future for both peoples. Now that you understand the problem, what about the solution? What about peace talks? So far, over 2 decades of U.S.-backed peace talks have actually made things worse by helping Israel continue the occupation. It's been years of talking while Israel massively expanded the Jewish settlements and literally redrew the map. Peace talks are good if they're real, but not when they're theater to cover a land grab. So now what? The current world superpower, the United States, has been a terrible friend, enabling Israel's destructive and self-destructive expansion onto Palestinian land by funding the Israeli military, the biggest recipient of U.S. foreign aid in the world. But there's another superpower that can make the difference: you. There's a movement with hundreds of thousands of people just like you across the world, including Palestinians and Israelis, protesting, educating, divesting, and boycotting, all to bring nonviolent international pressure on Israel to stop violating human rights of Palestinians. Throughout history, where governments have failed to push for justice, people just like you, like us, have taken the lead and won. Now it's the Palestinians' turn for freedom and justice. We can pressure Israel to end the occupation and the discrimination. We want all people, Jews and Palestinians, to have equality, human rights, and democracy. We can change history. Join us.
Just wanted to include the Jewish Voice for Peace with us today. Okay, there's a lot of stuff in these slides and a lot more. This is just a sketch, so all I'm going to do is go through these really fast so we can get to the good stuff. You know, this is kind of dry, but this is the basis of how we got here. First of all, the land of Palestine has been occupied for basically ever. So if you look back in the Old Testament, you get Assyria, Babylon, and Persia, and the Seleucids, otherwise known as the Greeks, and the Romans. Then with the destruction of Jerusalem, the Roman Empire forced the Jews into the diaspora, and historically there were, after that, any number of Jewish actions, that is, actions against the Jewish population in many locations to which they were dispersed. In the 1880s, we began to see the emergence of political Zionism, and Theodor Herzl was one of the voices that was at the beginning of that movement. At that time, Palestine was under the Ottoman Empire, which was partitioned, I believe, 1917, 1918 came under British rule. It was in 1917 that Britain publicly stated the Balfour Declaration, and here's the quote that was referred to earlier. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which shall prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. And we all know how well that went. Now, of course, in the 1940s, due to the persecution of Jews in Europe and Russia, a greater influx of Jewish people came into Palestine. They were buying up land that was owned by absentee landlords. Britain determined to leave Palestine in 1947. The UN was created, and they established a partition plan, which was rejected by the Arab nations. Let's talk about that partition plan, and in your packets you have the famous map card. The map card will show you the partition plan. It is the second map on the map card. The first map on the map card will show you the distribution of the population before the partition plan in 1947. You can see how much land belonged to Palestine, the green land. The second map on the map card shows you the partition plan in which 55% of the land was to be given to Israelis, making up only 30% of the population. And only 45% of the land was to be given to a future Palestinian state. Israeli leaders accepted the partition plan, but privately they planned to take more and more land. Palestinian leaders were not consulted, but would have opposed the plan, and the creation of the State of Israel then took place because of this conflict. when the State of Israel was created, immediately there was a war, which Israel refers to as the War of Independence, and which Palestinians refer to as the Nakba. That's where the 750,000 refugees came from. Then in 1967, the Nakba, or the setback, when Israel reoccupied East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights, as well as the Sinai Peninsula. The United Nations came back and looked at that and said, you know, we don't increase the territory of our nation by war anymore, so we require that you give back land that was taken in this conflict. And so Israel gave back the Sinai Peninsula, but they did not give back the Golan Heights. That has been effectively annexed. Jerusalem has been united. Prior to 1967, there was East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. West Jerusalem was Israeli, and East Jerusalem was under the mandate of Jordan, the nation of Jordan. But in 1967, with that war, supposedly Jerusalem was united. So now Israelis talk about united Jerusalem, and they are actively, using their own words, Judaizing the East Jerusalem areas by forcing East Jerusalemites out of their homes. All right. I would like to take a temperature of the room, since we have a limited amount of time. Am I giving you information you already have and don't need, or am I helping you? I am helping you. Okay. So I'm going to continue then. You've heard of the Intifada. Intifada is a word that means the shaking off. The point of Intifada is to shake off the occupation. In 1987, the first Intifada took place. 4 people were killed, maybe intentionally, maybe by accident, near Gaza, by an Israeli truck. The resulting Intifada took place from 87 to 93. In some places it was nonviolent. For instance, in Beit Sahur, it took totally a nonviolent face, where the people of Beit Sahur said, we're no longer going to pay any taxes to Israel because all that money just goes to building prisons. It doesn't actually take care of our trash or take care of our people or provide us with any infrastructure. And so Beit Sahur then suffered greatly from the invasions, home invasions, and closures. In other places, the Intifada was more violent. This Intifada ceased with the signing of the Oslo Accords, which was, first was 1983, and Oslo II was was it 83 or 93? Wait, let me get a slide ahead. Second Intifada, let's just finish that. Ariel Sharon visited the Temple Mount, and this was considered to be a threat because there was a fear among the people that an Israeli leader visiting the Temple Mount was threatening to take away the Al-Aqsa compound. And so that became a reaction.
He didn't just visit by himself, it was 1,000.
Along with 1,000 police officers. Yes, thank you. Yes, so it was really considered an aggression, and people became very reactive to that. You maybe have read the book Bethlehem Besieged by Mitri Rahab. Maybe you've heard of the time in 2002, I believe it was, when the Church of the Nativity became the safe place for the civilians of Bethlehem. They fled into the Church of the Nativity in hopes of not being killed by the Israeli military that had taken over the city of Bethlehem. Maybe some of you remember that. That was during the Second Intifada. That Intifada ended with the creation of the roadmap by the quartet. And the plan was that the roadmap would help end the occupation and would provide negotiations to create a Palestinian state and to secure Israeli security. Now, like I said, I am skimming the surface. There's an awful lot to talk about, and I just really want to continue to skim the surface because all of this is in books and in timelines on that website that I gave you. Oslo Accords, you hear a lot about Oslo Accords. This is a famous picture from the Oslo Accords. And what happened in Oslo, this was a plan that was supposed to move towards ending the conflict and providing security for Israel. What they did to begin with was to create three areas, A, B, and C. And Palestinian self-rule was to be initiated in stages. So this was going to be renegotiated within 5 years. And the first one was 93 and Oslo II in 95. Gave sovereignty to various Palestinian cities. That meant that these cities, which were Area A cities, would be totally controlled by the Palestinians, not by the Israelis. Area B, which would be like the suburbs of the cities, I guess you could say, the closest thing we have. Area B would be partially under Israeli control and partially under Palestinian control. And Area C, which was 62% of the West Bank, would be totally under Israeli military control. So let's see what that looked like. The brown areas are Area C, and the tan areas are Areas A and B. So this was the result of Oslo, and the idea was that gradually more and more territory would be given back to Palestinian control. But instead, what actually happened was that the settlements started to be placed in Area C. So all this area was under military control, and it began to be filled with settlements. It was never renegotiated, and it has the tendency of separating all of the Palestinian cities into little cantons. And in order to get from one place to another, then you have to pass through Area C. I'm going to speed through this because I have so much more that I want to share with you. All right. Let's look at the wall. In 2002, as a so-called security measure, the wall began to be built. In some places it is a concrete structure like this, with gun turrets that are actually armed. And, sorry, I'm looking ahead. There we go. This is in Bethlehem, and this child is playing in the street because the wall took away all the green space for all the children of Bethlehem, so that the only places that they have to play in now are within the limits imposed by the wall. So you often will see, kids that are either playing in the streets or they just don't have any other place to play. This is a picture of the wall snaking through the West Bank, and I took this off of the United Nations Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs website. But I like this picture because it gives you an idea of just how imposing this wall is and how much control it places on the landscape.
So what is in that valley right there? Are those settlements, or is that just three?
Right, this is Palestinian land over here, and the other side is Israeli. Yeah, I don't really know very much more of this picture. I mean, might be. How many of you have seen what the checkpoint is like? Now you saw how the wall sticks through. If you actually need to get through from one side to another, and you're a Palestinian who needs to get to work in the morning, you have to get through the checkpoint. So quite a few of you have seen it. I do have a video. If you would like to see the checkpoint 300 video, I can show it. Go for it. Okay. Bill's seen it before. families, their work, and their school.
طبعا كل شيء يوم سهل كل شيء يوم سهل أنا كل شيء يوم سهل كل يوم موت كل يوم يصير واحد يدفع الثاني يجيب يكسر من هون وسكن يكسر يعني أنا بعرف ناس كسر العقل تبعه والله شوي كل هذا الكلام ما بيسكروا كمان شوي صح
Inside the checkpoint building for several hours.
ما جوا ما فيش محل ما في هناك في 12 شباك على المرمى يمكن في 3 4 بس يعني كان اشتري شو الحبون شو عرض بعدين التزلت نكلم بيت كنيس ما تكلم مش واحد البلاد زي مسافر بالفاستور شيء نقي عم بقدر الماني مدير عن هذه شعار عندش مود يعني انا شيء ما جاي بشيش لي شعار الشيء لازم نلاقي كان مشوش واحد تصير كمان انا صوت
Checkpoints are sometimes used as collective punishment because they're allowed to be open on the one end, but they close them on the other, so that maybe there's just one person let through at a time, and then when it's really, really crowded, they just stop processing the guys, so they're stuck in there. And it puts our commute to shame. Just another quick picture of how the wall separates Palestinian from Palestinian by running through this neighborhood in Jerusalem. Now these people who maybe have neighbors or family on the other side of this wall will have to go the long way around to get where they need to go. This is a couple years old now and shows what the number of settlements looked like at that time in the West Bank. And settlements are always expanding and growing, and regardless of whether you hear of a settlement freeze or not, it's always continuing. So we're going to talk quickly about what is a settlement. These are blocks of gated cities that are only allowed, Jewish are only allowed to live there. This slide is a little bit old. We are over 650,000 settlers now in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, and all of them are there against international law. When they build a settlement, they build settlement roads that are Israeli only, and Palestinians that are found on those roads can be stopped and arrested and detained, and sometimes have their cars taken away from them. So this slide gives you some idea. The black lines are the Israeli-only roads, and what happens then is the Palestinians have made secondary roads that go under these roads, or else in some cases they have to drive really far to get around and about to where they want to go. So we think of a settlement as something less than it is. Settlements are actually well-established cities. They have sort of a common look to them. And what you're seeing here is a settlement road that's connecting Har-Hilo settlement to another settlement. This road, can you see my cursor moving on the road? Okay, so can you see the fence along each side of the road? Okay, so this community over here, this is a Palestinian community, and that's its agricultural lands on the other side. Okay, so If you own this house, that might be where you used to graze your sheep, and those might be your olive trees, but you can't get there anymore. And there's actually a law in the books that if you don't cultivate or care for your land for 3 years, it reverts to state land. So that means it becomes under Israeli control. And there's, whether or not they open these gates for agricultural use is totally at the whim of the occupation. So this gentleman in the north is wanting to get through to tend his olive groves, and here he is coming back through. This is a friend of mine, Meg Keepaker, took these slides. Apparently this gentleman was only allowed into his olive groves a couple days a year, and those of us that live in Iowa know that you can't have any kind of a crop if you can only actually get to it a couple days a year, even if it is an orchard. That's not how it works. So, sorry it was a cloudy day when I took this, but you get an idea of the niceness of the neighborhoods. These are actually, they look very Western, very suburban. Okay, now I want to move into some villages, and the villages I'm going to talk to you about are in Area C, which is still, how many years later, under total Israeli military control, which means if you need law enforcement in Area C and you're Palestinian, you go to the Israeli military. It means that the military, if you're driving, they can stop you. If you're Palestinian, they can make you get out of the car, do a body search under your car. They can hold you at gunpoint while they do so. They can arrest you on a whim. Villages that we're going to talk about today are Susia and Jibta. But first, let me show you the Israeli settlement of Susia. Notice that the names are similar. There's really only one little difference in the vowel spelling. The Palestinian village of Susia has been present on the land for many, many years, but not too long ago. In the 1980s, I believe, it was discovered that there was some archaeological findings in that village, which was a cave village, and the Palestinians that lived there were forced out of their homes and off their land. Some of them decided to settle on their agricultural land where they were herding their sheep. And this Israeli settlement of Susia was built in their place to take over where they had been. This is the Palestinian village of Susia. Because they were forced onto land in Area C, they were not permitted to build permanent structures. And so they lived in tents and makeshift structures. Next, I am going to show you, get an idea of, a little bit of an idea through 3 short videos of what life in this village is like. This is an introduction to Susia School. When I was at the medical company, I stayed in Susia overnight as a protected presence. The village was receiving threats and violence from the neighboring settlement. At the time, the school was not yet built. They were building it under a tent so that the building process would not be observed because it's in Area C.
هذا ظروف صعبة جدا. هنا مش عندنا ملعب نلعب فيه، مش عندنا ساحة نلعب فيها، مش عندنا صوت مناسبة، وبالرغم هذا كله إنهم الطلاب مسلمين لأنهم موجودين في المدرسة والمدرسة قريبة من بيوتهم.
This is like made out of caravan. It's like corrugated steel and it puts stucco on the outside. So the children are charming, of course. The school is still standing. This was built in 2011, but the village itself, the entire village has been under demolition threat for the entire village for, well, ever since I was there in 2011. The threats against them revved up in 2014 and 2015 when an ideological organization, Zionist organization called Intifada, went to the courts and said these people need to be moved off the land. This is our land. And so that situation's been revving up in the courts, and actually tomorrow, say a prayer, will be their last and final court date in which it is expected, because Avigdor Lieberman has this plan very solidly in his mind, that they will be told that they will be forcibly removed from their village permanently sometime next year. In fact, there's another village just like it, Khan al-Amr, near Jerusalem, that had its court date last week. And that was their final court date, and they were told they were to remove themselves by June of 2018, or they would be forcibly removed. By the way, forced removal of indigenous populations is expressly against the Fourth Geneva Convention and would be considered a war crime. Let's see a little more of Susia. Is this the one we just saw, or did I switch it already? This is a new one. Okay. A little more Susia. This is a Press TV news release that came out a couple years ago about the village.
The southern occupied Palestinian territories in the face of an insatiable and ruthless Israeli settler movement. Even this poor community has come under the scrutiny of the so-called Israel Civil Administration, a unit in the Israeli Military Affairs Ministry. The Israeli regime has delivered 52 demolition notices to the residents of this community, and an emergency appeal against the demolitions was filed. Residents here say the reason for the demolition notices is the proximity of this Palestinian community to the nearby Israeli settlements. 120 residents from a total of 300 face expulsion at any moment. Their tents, agricultural facilities, and a donated solar panel to generate electricity might be crushed under Israeli bulldozers.
We were first expelled in 1948, and we have lived in this area since. The year 1967 was our second Nakba. Settlements and the Israeli army regularly assault us. We have nowhere to go.
A right-wing Israeli movement called Regavim is spearheading efforts to expel and destroy Palestinian presence in Palestine, and is now currently behind an appeal to freeze any building in the community. The movement's stated aim is to promote a Jewish Zionist agenda. Human rights activists, however, did not sound optimistic about the fate of Susia.
Susia is a village that has been discriminated against in so many ways over the years. They're people, the poorest of the poor, who they were banished from their own lands where their village used to be in the 80s, and had to then start a new village on their agricultural lands in caves. The whole area of South Oakland Hills is basically cave dwellers. And even this little paltry ability to live on their agricultural lands is being denied.
The Israeli High Court is expected to rule on this at any moment, and the fate of this community is hanging now. As the sun sets, community members and a handful of international activists sit down to discuss what can be done to avert the demolitions. Ibrahim Husseini, Press TV, Susia, the southern occupied Palestinian territories.
So I've been advocating for the village of Susia now since 2011, but we really do fear that what will come down in the courts tomorrow will be the end of its line, the end of the story for this village. And it's really tragic. This last picture, you saw this earlier in the video. This is the bottom of a home that had like a tent structure on the top, and settlers actually set fire to this in the night while people were sleeping in it. A few people had to go to the hospital for smoke inhalation. Nobody was injured beyond that. But it was after that incident that the ecumenical accompaniers began to sleep in the villages protecting the presence. Let's move on to Jibdad-Deed. Jibdad-Deed is a village of about 150 people also living in Area C, in a small pocket of Area C, in the Bethlehem governorate. Now, Susie is down farther south. But Jibdad-Deed, as you look at it on the map, to the east of them is the Jordan Valley. That's all a closed military zone. So to the south of them, they are surrounded by the illegal Israeli settlements. And to the west and the north, they have Area B, and then if you continued on, you would get to the city of Bethlehem. About 150 people, about 50 children. They were given in 2016. They were actually given the solar array. Before that, they had only a generator that would work a few hours a day for their electricity. But with this solar array, they were able to have a little bit of electricity in their homes all day, which was fantastic. It really enabled the students to study at night. It enabled, think about it, medications like insulin to be refrigerated and food not to spoil. This was donated by the Netherlands and installed by a Jewish-Arab cooperation called Common Me. And on July 3rd of this year, the Israeli civil administration came in and took away the solar panels. They cut the wires and damaged the connection of the solar panels to the battery installation. And they did not give a demolition order, nor did they give any warning. This plunged the village back into use of a gasoline generator 4 hours a day. And a friend of mine, Hamid Kouasme, who is a UN human rights officer for Bethlehem and Hebron governance, contacted me and asked me to start an advocacy campaign for the village. So I began to inform people, to inform myself, and to write to Senators Grassley and Ernst, asking them, as I have done before, please place this issue before the State Department on my behalf as a redress of grievances for this village. I also started looking for a contact in the Jerusalem consulate that I might be able to speak to, because I was on my way to be in Bethlehem Governorate, and I was there last week. I left on September 14th. Throughout August, I was not able to get a person to talk to in the consulate because they were changing their staff. And in any case, it's very unusual for them to speak to a civilian just because the civilian says, hey, I'd like to talk with you. As has been explained to me, I am the senator's constituent. The senator is the State Department's constituent. So it's better to ask the senator to speak. But since I was going to be there, I was hopeful. On September 14th, as I was leaving my home, I checked my email one last time, and I had a message from the consulate. They said, Jibdad-Deed is on Washington's radar. We are interested in the village. Can you meet with us on Monday? So I went to the airport, and I was like, woo, woo, woo. And then I was thinking, I've never been to this village before. What the heck am I going to say to them? So I got to Palestine, and I called my friend Hamid, and I said, Hamid, you have to get me to that village tomorrow. And he said, okay. So we went to the village, we sat with the women's cooperative, I saw the area where the solar panels were gone, which looks like this. And I also got a chance to see the school. Now, let me tell you about the school. This community did not have an elementary school, and their children were walking 3 kilometers one way overland, rough, think snakes and scorpions and rocks, oh my. That was one way in order to get to school. So the community wanted to build an elementary school, and they did put one together. because it was Area C. They waited until Sabbath, and as the sun set on the Sabbath, they started building a school. They built it on August 21st. It was completed the morning of August 22nd. School was to start on August 23rd. The evening of August 22nd, as the sun set and Sabbath was over, the school was demolished by the Israeli Civil Administration. So the next morning, let me back up here. This is the school as it stood on August 22nd. And these are the children who have come to school, in their new school, standing in the hot sun because there is no school. So activists put up a tent for them, but it was a very, very hot day and everybody was disgusted. Anyway, that situation continued until the 8th of September. Again, it was the Sabbath. Again, by night, a school was built. This time it was built by the Palestinian Authority. This time, instead of a caravan school made out of corrugated metal and stucco, it was a concrete school built out of cinder blocks and mortar. They got the whole thing, all 5 classrooms up overnight. They worked all night. And in the morning, there was a military incursion against the school. But they resisted. And press was there. And Palestinian Authority leaders were there. And so the school is still standing. And I want to show you a few things about the school. I went to see it. This child, you can't see this very well, we should dim the lights, but this child is looking at tear gas canisters that were fired against his school in order for him to have a school. These Palestinian flags are festooned with tear gas canisters and sound grenades. This is what they look at when they come to salute their flag in the morning. This is what they have for a classroom at this time. If you can get an idea, it's raw cinder blocks and mortar. They do have windows. Palestinian Authority is planning to come in and do some insulation and perhaps bring electricity to the school, but the school does not have electricity right now. Would you want your children to have this for a primary school? But they're very happy to have it because before they had nothing. These boys wanted to pose for the camera. Once again, you have here, you have the tear gas canisters and the sound bombs that they're looking at. And here you have a sign that says you have to fight in order to get the best. So this is the message these school children are receiving. I will tell you that I was able to meet with the consular officer after seeing the village. And she gave me an hour and a half of time in a coffee shop. And I showed her these pictures, and she said, you know, we've already been to this village. We've been there before the electricity was taken away, and we've been following this. We want to do some behind-the-scenes diplomacy. There was a court hearing coming up to see if it would be possible to require the Israelis to return the solar panels. She wanted to know the date of that. And she wanted me to send all these pictures to her, which I did. And then you never know when you talk to the State Department, you know, what's going to happen with that information. It's like a sermon. You preach it and God takes it and you hope something happens, but you never really find out. When I got home, I had a theological conference to go to, and I happened to open up my Facebook account, and there was Hamid with pictures of the solar panels being returned quietly to the village. And I was really excited, and I said, Hamid, is that the solar panels being returned to the village? And he said, yes, they're back. They were quietly returned with a message from the civil administration that they didn't think they had a case and wanted to avoid the embarrassment of fourth hearing. So now, you know, I'll never know if that meeting was what they needed in order to go forward, or whether they were going to go forward in the first place. We are still hoping that they will go and visit the village again. And I really wanted to get through both of those situations, Juvet, Deeb, and Susia, because they're very current. And those of us that are doing a lot of writing and phone calling, these are the issues we've been focusing on in Area C right now. I think I should stop for questions because I'm about to be shut up. There's so much more we can talk about. So just a couple of questions. Wow. Who was monitoring the villages? Israeli settlers are constantly monitoring these villages, looking for opportunities to harass them. And I would say the Israeli civil administration is constantly monitoring any attempt to build anything in Area C because they would like to take it down. 300 donated structures were removed in 2016. Donated structures like the solar array that we just saw. Donated from European Union countries, from the United States, yeah. Netherlands said they would stand steadfast with the village and continue to help them. But they weren't forthcoming. I'm sure what they were doing was waiting to see what would happen in the court case. That would have been a slow process. Yeah. Bill is suggesting that everybody should go to the UN when their structures are taken down by Israel. The press actually is a powerful tool in that case. There are a lot of people from various organizations that do this kind of work. Some of them are Jewish, some of them are various Christian denominations. I happened to start out with the Economical Accompaniment of Palestine and Israel, EAPPI. There's Christian peacemaker teams, there's Bet Salem, which is Jewish, there's Rabbis for Human Rights, which is Jewish. There's quite a few of them. Maria Filipponi goes to Gaza, I think just as a physician, she arranges her own tours. She may be associated with the Friends. American Friends Service Committee gets into a lot of places too. Yes?
You made a comment about the settlements not, it seems like a tame word for what those actually are. And I feel the same way about the use of the word settler. For people that aren't familiar with what that really means, it just sounds very benign. And I'm wondering, do you use other language sometimes when you're describing the settlements or the settlers?
No, but when I do these presentations, I make it clear what settlements are, because as Americans, we have this kind of historic thought that a settlement is some benign little group of white people out in the wilderness, taming the wilderness like Daniel Boone. You know, we think of this way, and actually these are whole cities with, you know, municipal buildings and swimming pools and landscaping, while the local population has limited access to water and limited access to electricity and threats against their existence. I have some learning tools that I'm happy to pass out and would encourage you to look at and take. We developed them, Western Iowa Synod, the synod next to ours, developed these. And what they are is they're little worksheets about various aspects of the occupation where you can get a small group together, read the story, and then answer some questions. So there's one about access to water, there's one about movement restrictions. And thank you very much. I've been told I'm